Start.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Good to be with you today. Hope you had a nice long weekend. I had a long weekend too, because if you guys don't come in, I'm always sick. I never come in. You guys don't have to come. Before we dive into you can debate the ethics of that as that could be your independent project at the end, your final project. What's the ethics of using days off? Before we dive into the very short lecture that we have for today, I want to give you the opportunity. Does anyone have any questions about the Module 4 readings or assignments? Yes, Luis.
Can I get a hard copy of the other book, of the Bible?
Yeah, not right this second. Pieper, I don't have hard copies.
It's on the school.
It's on school.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can find the PDFs of all the textbooks. Go to our class page, click on materials, and there's a folder called textbooks. It's different than the assigned readings folder. The assigned readings is when I give you little articles and things like that. For full textbooks, the folder is called textbooks. But with Pieper, I don't have extra copies, just the electronic copy. Other questions about readings or assignments for Module 4? So all that is due on Friday. And then next week, Module 5, that is your timely Sabbath rest. In fact, I've already applied your credit to your grades on MyFighter, so you can look on there, not right this second, but look on there and see how that has impacted your grade. It's positive impact for everybody. Doesn't work any miracles for those few who haven't done anything, but that's only a few people. What I want to do for you today is introduce you to Josef Pieper. I'm probably going to slip up and call him Joseph instead of Josef, but he is Josef Pieper, the German philosopher who wrote the exquisite essay, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. So this essay, which takes up only the first part of the book, so this is Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It was originally a lecture. He delivered the lecture in 1947. We've hinted at this already, but what can you tell me about Germany in the 1940s? What was going on in Germany? Calm, peaceful time? Business as usual, same old? Oh, I'm so boring. Nothing's going on. No, what's going on? A couple big things. Okay, Hitler and the Nazis. So the nation of Germany was ruled by the Nazi Party from 1933 to 1945. And who's the leader of the Nazi Party? Adolf Hitler. Good dude, right? Real good dude? Yeah. Some people in the YouTube comments seem to think he's a real good dude, but he was not a real good dude. Hitler comes to power. How does he come to power? Kick in doors, go on a chainsaw massacre? No, he's democratically elected. He actually only comes in second, though, but 13 million Germans voted for Adolf Hitler in the 1932 election. He came in second place, and so the winner, the incumbent President von Hindenburg, appointed Hitler as his number 2. So Hitler had to be second fiddle to somebody else for a short time, but that somebody else just up and died. Hitler didn't kill him. There's one guy Hitler actually didn't kill. That was just Hitler's good luck. So when President von Hindenburg died, Hitler, who had been voted for by 13 million Germans, stepped up and he transformed the office of president into the office of Führer, which is an all-powerful totalitarian leader. Hitler had a couple of ideas, a couple of projects. One is he wanted to conquer half of the world. He started that project in 1939, maybe a little earlier, because he invades Austria, although they loved him in Austria because that's where he's from, and the world goes, that's just Hitler. It's okay. He won't do no more. He invades Czechoslovakia, and the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain has a meeting with Hitler, and he says, "Okay, tell you what, Hitler. Here's what we're going to do. The world's super mad about this, so we're going to let you have it. All right, just no more conquest, okay?" And it's like, sure, no, we'll be bros. Neville Chamberlain, he signs this treaty with Hitler, he comes out and he gets off the plane back in England, and the reporters are greeting him, and he holds up this agreement with Adolf Hitler's signature, and he says, we have secured peace in our time. Only no, because he's Hitler, right? So then he invades Poland, and then the dominoes just start falling, and it leads to a little bit of a fight, a conflict. What do we call that fight? World War II. Steve's got it. World War II. The bloodiest, most brutal, most miserable combat that humanity has ever experienced. In the meantime, in the background, he not only wanted to conquer all this territory, he also had a plan to commit genocide. Do we know what genocide is? What's genocide?
When you kill a mass murder.
Yeah, mass number of people, and the goal is to eliminate or get as close to possible as eliminating an entire group of people. It could be a religious group, an ethnic group, a racial group. In Hitler's case, it was the Jewish people. Hitler was an anti-Semite. He hated the Jews. He was loud and proud about that too. He published a book in 1922, Mein Kampf, Mein Struggle, telling everybody, this is what I'm going to do. If you ever put me in charge, this is what I'm going to do. And everybody acted surprised. So with the mass murder of the Jews that he oversaw, it was really this perversely efficient, mechanized, industrialized system of death that killed 6 million people. And the human mind just can't wrap itself up. We can know that as a fact. That's a big number. But the human mind really can't wrap itself around suffering and depravity of that magnitude. Eventually, who wins the war? Hitler or the Allies?
The Allies.
The Allies who oppose Hitler. It's the Soviets. We're actually working with the Soviet Union at the time, the golden age, because it's like teaming up with Dr. Doom to take on Thanos, because as bad as Joseph Stalin was, you can't have Hitler with the Infinity Gauntlet. So it's the Soviets who make it to Berlin first, and when the Soviets make it to Berlin, Hitler does not want to fall into the hand of the Soviets. So what does he do? Kills himself, yes. He marries his longtime lover, Eva Braun, the day before. He gives her a cyanide capsule. He takes a cyanide capsule and he blows his head off, and the Germans surrender. The defeat of Germany. I'm not suggesting that it was unfair or unjust, but the defeat of Germany was total. All right, this is what all of Germany looked like after the Second World War, and this is the context, the historical context, into which Josef Pieper steps in 1947 to deliver this lecture, which became the written essay, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. So let's meet Josef Pieper. He lived from 1904 to 1997. He's a professor of philosophical anthropology at the University of Munster in Germany. And anytime we're talking about someone who was a German adult in the 1930s and 1940s, what question pops into your mind? Was he a Nazi? So, short answer, no. Long answer, not really. So there have been some accusations against Josef Pieper, and the most popular place they've made their way to his Wikipedia page. The Wikipedia page pretty much accuses him of being a collaborator with the Nazis. So let's take that apart so we know who we're dealing with. Are you being assigned to learn ethics from a Nazi? I think that's a fair question. Have you been assigned to read a Nazi to tell us what good behavior might be like? That's a fair question. So here are a couple of things he did that caused controversy. At the very beginning of Nazi rule in Germany, he published an article that was published in a series of journals, and the journal series was all the perspectives of Catholics who were supporting the new Nazi regime. Pieper wrote an article in support of a law passed by the Nazis. The law, though, had something to do with how trade unions were organized. It didn't have anything to do with anti-Semitism. It didn't have anything to do with conquering other countries, and Pieper was never a member of the Nazi Party. And later on, he greatly regretted having even published that article. Sort of the sick reality of life in Nazi Germany is that there's 12 years where the Nazis aren't just in charge of conquest and murder, but it's also the Nazis who are in charge of speed limits and paving the roads and building the schools and the hospitals, because like it or not, and I hope it's not for everybody in here, but like it or not, that was the government. The Nazis were the government. So he did support a Nazi policy, but the policy had to do with how trade unions were to be organized. He refused to join the Nazi Party, and for that he was forbidden to teach publicly for most of Hitler's time in power. But he did go on to join the German army, not in a combat position, but as a military psychologist. So he's never firing shots in defense of Hitler or firing shots at the Allies, but technically that is collaboration with the Nazis. He's part of the German army during the Second World War. He's not alone in this. The whole army wasn't full of Nazis. There were many people who didn't support Hitler but joined the army because it was their country's army and their country was at war. You might think of a parallel. There are probably many people in the U.S. military today that don't think much of President Joe Biden or the Democratic Party. There were probably many people in the military 3-4 years back who didn't think much of President Donald Trump or the Republican Party. 4 years before that, people in the military didn't think much of Barack Obama and the Democratic Party, but they joined the military to defend their country, not a particular political vision. That was a very common response in Germany. At the same time, it's a response that's very open to ethical critique. Fact of the matter is, they weren't joining a military led by Barack Obama or Donald Trump or Joe Biden. They were joining a military led by Hitler that was actively seeking to conquer the world. There were heroic voices among the Germans who stood up and openly and actively opposed Nazism at the top of their lungs. And many of them were martyred for it, gave their lives, were killed for their opposition to Hitler. And that makes them heroes who deserve to be looked up to and have statues built of them. Josef Pieper is not one of those. Right? So Josef Pieper did not show heroic courage. He showed regular cover your assage and make sure you're still getting a paycheck and you're not thrown in a concentration camp, and make sure your kids are fed. All the while never actively supporting all the horrible things Hitler was doing, but also sort of behind the scenes. And you can kind of imagine what is a German military psychologist, you got to ask, what is he being called on to make people become mentally okay with? It's a question. In the face of a tyrant, in the face of totalitarianism, in the face of real evil, what responsibility do ordinary people have? Ethically, morally, what responsibility? That would be a great final project topic for somebody to tackle. Is the responsibility, I must lay down my life to oppose the evil at all costs? Or is it enough just not to actively contribute? At any rate, Josef Pieper is not a hero, but that's not why we're talking about him. We're talking about him because his ideas are very valuable and can help us make sense of the whole of human experience. That's not the same as me endorsing I agree with everything the guy says, but everything the guy says is worth thinking about. Fact is, he lived another 50 years after leisure, the basis of culture. He's the author of a number of books. I've just named a few of them in the slide here. In Tune with the World, A Theory of Festivity. On Hope, The End of Time, The Silence of St. Thomas. Of course, Leisure, The Basis of Culture, which is my jam. If I tried to boil down his whole body of work into one main theme, it would be this. He says, there are some elements of modern thought, there are some elements of how modern thought views the human person, how modern philosophers and modern politicians look at what does it mean to be human. There's some things about modern thought that actually make us open to totalitarianism, that make us susceptible, that make us vulnerable to figures like Hitler and Stalin. And he says that there are actually some aspects of older ways of thinking, of ancient and medieval thought, that if we could recover some of these older ways of thinking, would sort of help vaccinate us against the next Hitler, the next Stalin. He's not saying everything new is bad and everything old was good, but he is saying we need to be careful not to say everything new is good and everything old was bad. So sort of his purpose in life was to salvage what could be salvaged of much older ways of thinking and represent them to a modern audience in a way that might, at least from his perspective, be beneficial. He opens up Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and he says, we could begin with an objection. Right? And here's the objection. It seems like the present, present is 1947 Germany. It seems like the present of all times, it seems like when this is our world, the last thing we need to be talking about is leisure. What's leisure? Free time, rest, enjoyment. I just died a little bit inside, those of you taking my humanities class. Can you see why people would argue that against him? You're talking about leisure? Is leisure what's needed right now? It sure looks to me like what's needed is a hell of a lot of work. Backbreaking work. Because we've got a society to rebuild. Literally, we've got to rebuild our nation stone by stone. But even more importantly, if it's Germany in 1947, more importantly than the rebuilding of bridges and roads and buildings, Ralph, where am I going with this? What's even more important than the building of bridges and buildings and roads? Yeah, it's a nation that has devoured its own soul. There is a spiritual rebuilding of the German soul that has to happen. And I'm using the language of soul because I can't find a better way to describe it. I'm presenting it in nothing but a poetic way. Pieper's going to present it in a literal way. You've got a nation that's lost its soul, that sold its soul. All right? You ever seen the old videos from the 60s, like when the Beatles came to America and all the young girls are screaming at the top of their lungs for the Beatles? Has any of you seen those? I should have played one at the beginning. Rewind the clock 20 years and go across the pond to Germany, and all the young girls are screaming like that for Hitler. All right? You have, yes, you should watch Hitler give a speech and watch the crowd's reaction. Seriously, it'll chill you to the bone. You have a nation that has sold its soul to, if not the devil, devil. How do we rebuild that house? And doesn't that require a lot of work? And now here you come, Josef Pieper, psychologist for the Nazi army, who really thought Nazi policy on trade unions wasn't so bad. Now you're going to walk in here and you're going to talk to us about what? Playing soccer and video games and watching movies? You're going to talk to us about leisure? About free time? This is no small objection. That's a good answer to it. To build our house at this time implies not only securing survival, but also putting in order again our entire moral and intellectual heritage. And before any detailed plan along these lines can succeed, our new beginning, our refoundation, calls out immediately for a defense of leisure. And then that's what he attempts to give in the essay that follows. So, any questions about that? You know, I've brought you into like the first 2 paragraphs of the essay, and then the rest is for you to read. First 2 chapters this week, hopefully by Thursday, and chapters 3 through 5 by Monday of next week. Any questions about background stuff for him? I want to show you some suggested resources that'll help you understand Pieper better, or at least may. So if you go to the assigned and suggested readings folder on the material page, this time not the textbook folder, see there is a suggested article called Searching for Josef Pieper. That goes into a lot more depth about just what exactly he was up to and what exactly he wasn't up to during the Nazi period in Germany. And I've posted 2 video links. They're both podcasts about the book. One of them is, even though it's on YouTube, it's just the audio, but one of them you can see the 2 guys sitting around talking about the text. So I hope you'll check those out. Any last questions about this before we move on? Ralph? I think you want to stick around for a few minutes. Okay, thank you, Ken.